We're good, Andrew?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Notice was given of the workshop meeting of Commissioners Court of Grimes County. Today's date of Wednesday, March the 3rd. A workshop meeting of Commissioners Court of Grimes County will be held this date to follow our regular meeting that adjourned this morning at 10:24. The time is now 10:30 a.m. This meeting has been called, we're at the 114 West Buffington Avenue in Anderson, Texas. This meeting has been called to order. Our agenda item is to discuss and review the Grimes County COVID leave policy. And I am effectively, respectively going to turn it over to Ms. Talita Coleman to bring us up to date and give us some things to consider. So, Ms. Coleman?
So basically what I've given you is what we are currently doing, which was issued July 2nd, 2020, about when employees, if they come in contact with somebody who has COVID, the suggested protocol. We have been paying our employees regardless whether they're quarantined because of exposure or actually contagious. No matter how many times they're exposed, more than what the 80 hours, which at one point was mandated, which that mandate expired December of last year. So basically, I drew up a COVID policy, which I gave that to you as well, and presented that to y'all last time that we met. And then we agreed that we would have a workshop to kind of go over to see where we are now with the coronavirus. I haven't been able to read through all of Governor Abbott's order that he did yesterday, but he has suggested or is allowing Texas to open back up fully next Wednesday. And he has stated that the mask mandate can be rescinded as well. So I provided you with a copy of that. And then I ran some new numbers on what the county has spent for the employees up to date from April of last year through March 5th of this year. It's broken down by categories, whether they are quarantined by sick, if they're salary, hourly, part-time, if they were actually out because they had tested positive for COVID, and so forth.
Okay, may I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You redacted some information in the past, on the past schedule that you gave us.
I just redact the employee's name for HIPAA because it identifies, depending on which category their hours are coded to.
Mm-hmm.
It does. That's because they were actually tested positive. So for HIPAA purposes, I've left their names off of that.
But that's not on this particular new one you gave us, right? So I make sure I'm understanding it.
Yes, their names are removed from that one as well.
Okay, so I'm just going to take this one as an example. Like your tax assessor or your county treasurer has more than one blank spot. So
Correct. That means multiple employees. So if a blank spot designates an employee.
a blank spot here
Yes, ma'am.
designates an employee.
Yes, ma'am.
But when it comes to the treasurer and the tax assessor office, you combine them?
No, ma'am. There's only one.
Is that what you're saying? There's only one person?
So the bottom column, look at my department. The grayed out column is the end.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, this report, when it was ran, it doesn't have the column up at the top to tell you which one it is. It's at the bottom. So
Okay.
if you look, there's 3 blanks. I have 3 employees, 1 part-time, myself, and a full-time. So that represents
Okay.
those. And then below that is the county clerk. Those blank spaces above that are how many employees have been out with COVID-related pay,
Mm-hmm.
auditor,
Okay.
and so forth.
Okay. So is the county treasurer's office correct?
Yes, they've only had one. The last time they had it, they worked from home.
Okay. So it doesn't include the ones that work from home. This is just totally out.
They
I'm not,
received 100% some type of COVID pay.
okay, and I'm not able to work, period, from
Correct.
home. Okay. Okay, that's what I was trying, I called you yesterday, didn't realize it was an off day, but I'm glad you.
I didn't have a missed call.
Oh. It wasn't on your phone, it was in the office phone.
Oh, okay.
Okay, can you go back to what your concern is?
It just, we don't have any type of policy now with it coming to leave, and like I said, we've just been coding it as time off regardless of what they're quarantined for. And we don't do that with any other type of illness. And I just want to be able to protect the county.
So this is your suggested new policy?
Yes, ma'am, it's a 2-page one, so it's, one says the Grimes County protocol for county employees who've been exposed, and then the other one is the COVID-19 paid sick leave.
Can we talk about each one separately?
Sure.
Sure.
So, making an observation on this, the CDC has issued guidelines with regard to vaccination. It's my understanding that if a person has been vaccinated, that they are no longer required to quarantine if they're exposed to somebody that's positive. And I have some personal knowledge about how they're operating now, and I say that, I guess the medical field, or at least one office in particular, if you test positive, you quarantine for 10 days, and then at the end of 10 days, if you're non-symptomatic, you
Can return back to work.
you can return back to work, and they are not, they're not retesting to obtain a negative test. Their theory is, or their line of thought is, if you've tested positive and you've had the virus, that more than likely you're gonna have the antibodies in your system for at least up to 90 days, and that you'll continue to test positive. I'm just going-
Yeah,
So,
that's why we said we can either have a doctor's note saying they can return back or a negative test, which is what we've been doing. Because there was some medical providers that refused to actually retest. And then we did have some instances where we had a couple employees who tested multiple times and they continued testing positive with no symptoms. And finally the doctor was like, you can return back to work, so. And this is just a draft. I mean, it can be changed and altered any way the court seems fit to do. If the court just wants them quarantined for the 10 days, and if they show no symptoms, and they can come back with or without a doctor's note or without a negative test, that's the court's decision.
And Mr. Foltz, if we did indeed adopt, let's say we adopted this proposed policy as is and made it a part of the policy manual, what governance do we have to enforce that upon other elected officials?
You at least have the same ability that you have every year in the budget to say, if you're not going to abide by the rules of the court, then your budget may not be as full of wishes as you want it to be. It's the same thing though as any personnel policy, and or any item that's in the personnel policy. You could have any elected official could thumb his nose or her nose at the policy. But of course, there tends to be thumbing of the nose on occasion of those things that may be some requirement on them, but not the same thumbing of the nose when it comes to the benefits that are in the personnel policy, like tenure, like somebody getting paid additional amount after being here 10 years. So that's consistent with all that you already know, Judge. I would also though point out that we're talking about folks not having to use their vacation or sick. We're talking about where the county basically, it's equivalent of admin time that basically says because of this thing, it's a pass. And Talita and I have talked about it. I continue to be of the opinion that the 80 hours, it seemed to me the 80 hours was a fair thing. That's the pass, that's the admin that you get, and the rest of it's your sick time. I know that seems somewhat unfair, but it is then incentive for folks to be cautious and take some precaution. It's the same thing as if you were aware that there was a place where the flu may exist. You wouldn't expose yourself, or you wouldn't take precautions so that you were going to have to be out of work.
Right.
Because in that circumstance, you're gonna have to take sick or vacation time. So I don't know that it's now. I don't know that the court says now is the time that we folks we require people to be personally accountable. Maybe that is when you know that there are sufficient vaccines out there, that if people aren't getting them, it's their own fault that they're not getting the vaccines. Maybe that's when you say, we're going back to, this is just like some other illness. But it seems to me you sure ought to be thinking in that direction. Now, we had the conversation the last couple of times, I think that Toledo brought this, is maybe now is not the time, and that's for you all to decide. But if there are folks who continue to say, well, I was exposed again, I'm out for another 2 weeks. Oh, I'm exposed again, I'm out for another month. Oh, I'm exposed. What are you doing to take precautions to be sure it doesn't happen to you?
Sure.
Maybe you're not taking precautions.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was much more than you asked for. I'll get down off this soapbox.
No, but I mean, I think it relates to what we're addressing here. And I guess one of the questions that we as a court have to answer, are we too soon to impose that? Are we, is the timing right to impose that? There are a number of counties that and I can name a few of them, but they have gone, at the end of last year, they went back to their standard policy, whatever their standard policy was, of requiring people to take their sick time, then requiring people to take their vacation time, then requiring their people to go on FMLA if appropriate.
Yeah, there's a lot of counties have done that, and this policy that I drafted does not reflect that. It's still giving up to the 80 hours, for the coronavirus, because there are a lot of people who are still afraid of the virus, who are uncertainty of just how it is contracted, even though it's a year into it, and it is still a new virus, and we don't know any of the ways that it's going to mutate. They're saying that there's a mutated version out there that's coming in. So this policy would still allow the employees, and it could be, the Commissioners Court could say a year, every year we can get 80 hours, employees are eligible for the 80 hours if they actually get or exposed to the COVID. But after that 80 hours is over for that year, then you start using your own sick or personal time off.
And that's what this reflects, or, okay.
Now, I haven't read anywhere, and maybe it's out there, but I haven't read where any counties would have like 80 hours of sick time and 80 hours of COVID exposure time. I haven't.
No, it would be combined, total max, whether
Okay.
you're exposed or contracted, you get 80
Doesn't
hours.
matter, it's one or the other, it's 80 hours, okay. Okay, because what I thought I was hearing was we'd have 80 hours for normal sicknesses and then 80 hours for COVID exposures, okay.
No, it says once the 10 days or 80 hours have been
Right.
exhausted, then the employee has the option to use personal time to cover additional days.
Okay.
So it's kind of I try to do it to where it would still be fair, because this is a new virus, even though we're a year into it now, it's still new and there's a lot of uncertainties. And I'm fine if the court wants to continue doing things that we're doing now. This is just a protection for the court, because we don't have any actual policy. We just have a suggested protocol.
Do you have a feel for how many, and I don't know how you validate this, but that's why I say a feel. Do you have a feel for how many employees have maybe abused this since we've allowed this? Because maybe you get feedback from, you got Road and Bridge sitting here. He might say, I feel like I have one or none, or I had 3 people that were consistently getting exposed. They go to the bingo parlor every Friday night, just, hey, I'm exposed, I'm exposed, I'm exposed.
There have been some concerns brought up. There's been a bunch of hearsay, of people thinking that they might have an employee or two who could potentially be abusing it, but it's not, I guess, actual, like it's nobody has
validated.
actually came to me and said, look, boom, this person is, you know, what do I do?
Yeah.
Well, I
It's
think
been insinuated, let me put it that way, it's been insinuated.
we're getting back to touch on something that the county attorney was referencing, and in conjunction with, he probably is not, the order by Greg Abbott, Governor Abbott. I think, it's my opinion, that at some point we have to really start moving in the direction of personal accountability. And, I mean, we're given 80 hours this year for the COVID. Well, what virus is gonna come up next year or the next, I mean, where does it end? I'm not trying to minimize any of it. I certainly understand the seriousness of it, but there are mechanisms in place now, and I think people are knowledgeable enough now, at least they should be, on some of these accountability things that have an impact on tax dollars at the end of the day. All that to say, I don't want people that feel ill or have symptoms similar to the COVID to show up to work either. I mean, I don't think that's, so.
And like John C. stated, you know, maybe it's now not the time for the county, but it's something that at some point we really need to get something in place as a protection for the county as a whole.
Now, it is my understanding that the entitlements with the new plan that President Biden issued, it doesn't cover.
The part that I read, they extended some certain aspects of the COVID relief, but the paid sick time was not one of them.
Right.
And
The
that's-
tax credit was extended.
tax credit was, which we
And we
opted
don't
out
do
of
the
that. No.
tax credit. Is it any particular, I know we talked about it, but
Just for fear that we might have to pay some of that portion back if we allowed our employees to opt into it.
And then they
if
leave.
They weren't here.
And we don't get it
I had a lot
back.
of concerns from employees who didn't want us to do it as well.
okay, all right, I just wanted to make sure.
So that's why, because he didn't extend the COVID leave policy, and we do still have a lot of concerns with the COVID-19, I kind of meshed the two back together and said that the county would pay up to the 80 hours or 10 days, since now the quarantine time is 10 days from the date of exposure, which would still give some flexibility, you know, with the employees who may come in contact or contract COVID-19 to be able to be compensated if they're not able to work from home. Now, a lot of our offices now have the capability to work from home. So this would just be for those employees who do not have the ability to work from home or can't work from home.
Well, I agree that it is time for us to look at our policy and perhaps go ahead and make a decision. I think this is about your third time bringing this to our attention. And so I personally, I don't have a problem with going with the policy that you've presented to us.
Now, I have not had John C. look at the policy draft because I was waiting to see if we were going to do any type of changes. So if this is what the court wants to approve, then I will get with John C. to get his blessing and then put it back on the next agenda for y'all to adopt.
Or you could just approve the material terms and she and I could refine it if need be. So approve it conditioned upon my review, but I'm sure it's fine.
Well, this
Well,
is a workshop, so
Oh,
we
I
can't approve
didn't
it.
remember that. Thank you.
That's all right. I've been reminded of that a few times.
If I could make a comment or two. Earlier, y'all asked about people abusing the policy.
Yes.
We had 2 or 3 that were repeatedly being exposed. Oh, I gotta be off for 10 days. Never did have any kind of symptoms and were obviously not taking any steps to manage their lifestyle. And I think limiting the hours that they can get paid, and I think it's the hours can be cumulative, right? Would help curtail that. The other thing I would ask on
And
quarantine.
your department's a little bit unique in that they can't do road paving or ditch cleaning at home. They've got to be on the job site.
That's right. And there were at least a couple individuals that certainly appeared to be abusing it, saying, oh, I was out, you know, Saturday night exposed to somebody and I gotta be off for the next 2 weeks.
Sure.
The other thing that goes to that same point, on the quarantine policy, it says quarantine themselves in their home. If y'all would consider striking the in their home, what we have done with employees that had an exposure but did not have symptoms, we told them, come to work, go straight to your machine, stay away from everybody, wipe down your machine at the end of the day in case somebody else comes along the next day and uses it, but continue to work, but you're isolating yourself and quarantining away from everybody, just not sitting at home.
And when you're talking about their machine, you're talking about their mobile
If
machine.
it's, yeah, if it's an operator that's on, you know, a maintainer, you know, whatever equipment they
Sure.
use, many times they can use that equipment without having to get close to any of the other employees.
Mhm.
A
That
foreman
makes
can
sense.
call them on their phone, they've all got phones. Here's where I need to go today, do this and this and this. Stay away from everybody. If they're truck drivers, bring the blade operator, rock or whatever, they don't need to get out and talk to them. Stay in the machine, do your work, keep working. And you know, if the test comes back, you know, negative, great. You know, or if you just never develop symptoms, that's great too.
Okay.
If they're actually experiencing symptoms and are feeling bad, sure, stay home. But I think if we struck the in their home, would actually help keep more people working through this, than maybe if we didn't take that out.
Is that language on the proposed? No, 'cause I'm
Yeah,
not.
it's bullet number 1. It says quarantine themselves in their home for 5 days from the date of notified exposure. So we could just scratch that and just say quarantine themselves for 5 days from the date of notified exposure
Oh,
and
okay.
minimize exposure to others.
That's a good point.
Okay.
And then I would also suggest, I think if you actually have it, you're testing positive, limiting once your symptoms have passed, not requiring the negative test to come back, but limiting it to 10 days after your symptoms have passed would be helpful also. I know in my case, it took me 4 tries to get a negative test, and 2 more weeks after I would have been back to work based on the way I was feeling. So, just a suggestion.
And isn't the CDC, you looked at it recently, they're not
think it's
requiring
7.
negative tests anymore.
No.
I think it's actually 7 days and 24 hours without symptoms.
Is that right?
I think
It's,
so.
The
I think
last
it's
I heard it was,
It was 10, but I think
did
it's,
they drop it down to
Well,
7?
I would
I thought it
suggest,
was 7 with no symptoms.
Yeah,
10 if
10.
symptoms.
yeah.
if symptoms.
I thought it was 7 with 24 hours with no symptoms.
Because they are continuously changing and modifying,
Just
and I
find out
understand
whatever
that,
the most
but.
recent one is, it is.
So that, I think the bullet that he was talking about is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It says if the results come back negative, but the employees has no symptoms, continue to quarantine in their homes for the remainder of the 2-week or 10-day period and get retested. Employees cannot return to work until they get a negative test result or a doctor's note. So we can change that up, however.
Yeah, make that, I guess, kind of resemble the CDC recommendation for return. I think that's what it is. It used to be 2 days or 72 hours after 10 days
With no
with
symptoms.
no symptoms, and I think they bumped it down from there.
And so later you could just put in there consistent with CDC guidelines,
Yeah,
because they may change after.
that's true, that's true.
Because it might get shorter and shorter or longer and longer.
Right.
And if they're doing what they're instructed to do about contacting Toledo, then Toledo can update them, well, okay, looking at the calendar, no symptoms by this date, you need to report back to work or have the doctor's note.
there still remains a question, I think, in my mind of when do we, is now the time to say you have to use your sick time? I mean, I would hate for people to come back to work with COVID, but I'd also hate for them to come back with tuberculosis or anything, any other communicable disease as well. And we would require that they use sick time on that, under that situation.
I personally think we may be moving in that direction because, like you said, there are efforts now to mitigate your sickness. At least if you should contract it, maybe it not be as bad on you if you receive the vaccination. You know, there are options now. But before we had no options besides mask wearing and social distancing. Now we have that added measure of vaccinations also. That is an option to anyone that's willing to take it. I mean,
Why don't we do something like this? I mean, this is March already, but get it refined, reviewed by John C., and then maybe by around May the 1st, because that would give us the rest of March, all of April for more vaccines to be administered, us to get a little bit of a better feel of how the trend is going, and as long as the numbers are staying down, going down, then we might be a little more comfortable around May the 1st
so
to implement this, yes.
Make it effective May 1st.
Right.
We can go ahead and redraft it and get it on the court for it to be
Well,
approved.
Also-
I think right now, though, there can still be some abuses if we don't implement at least this one that kind of limits you to 80 days for the year.
80 hours.
I mean, 80 hours for the year versus, and then maybe revisit it then to, I mean, eliminate it altogether and just treat it as an ordinary illness as well. Maybe at the May, like you're talking about the May, but I think if we had brought this one to the next commissioner's court, to at least kind of have a standard now versus, you know, kind of
because right now we have
reduce
nothing
the
in place.
mitigation, yeah.
This is suggested protocol.
Right, that was a suggested protocol for testing purposes.
Right.
We didn't ever have anything to direct pay because the court had opted to pay our employees regardless of why they were quarantined, whether it was exposure, childcare problems, or actually,
And we had the money's already
and
budgeted,
the money was
so.
already budgeted.
This could help control some of the abuses that potentially are there. And then, like you said, I think revisit it, you know, in May or June, and, you know, see if we want to remain with this or.
Sure.
And we have to eliminate it altogether.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, if it's accurate that there may be sufficient vaccines for everybody who wants one to have by the end of May, it seems to me that's when you go back to the thing that Commissioner Cox is saying, is that this is like any other
Yeah,
condition.
I agree.
So, I mean, I'll share that.
Well, we appreciate your input.
It's a workshop. So if you'll make the changes and then let Mr. Foltz take a look at it,
Okay.
get it back on the agenda, and we'll rock and roll from
Was
there.
there anything else that anybody saw that needed to be changed, or other than just the coming back to work, making it compliant with CDC guidelines and changing quarantine themselves in their home just to quarantine themselves?
Or maybe potentially more defining the 80 days is for the annual period, I guess, versus.
80 hours.
I mean,
80 hours.
I don't want to say that. I'm
We
seeing
just want to go around the world, that's what.
I can put something in there saying, so y'all want to do it as a yearly right now, put in there as,
Yeah, for now, like, it would
now.
have to be within a, you know.
I'm making a notation on my last page, I'm putting CDC update, and then maybe put the date, because as the CDC changes and we look forward, gosh, when did that change come in, and when did we make that change? So I would consider putting, you know, whatever the CDC guidelines are at the time we approve it, we could go back to that, or at least we know where we're shooting from.
Right.
Anything else, commissioners?
No.
Mr. Walker, thank you for staying and sharing your input. If there's no further discussion on the Grimes County COVID leave policy, We will then go to agenda item number 3. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I make the motion we adjourn.
Second.
There's a motion from Commissioner Walker and seconded by Commissioner Dobianski on agenda item number 3 to adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the time is 11 a.m.